Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Harebrained Games. Today we're going to take a look at Nevsky. We're going to review this game. This is a game that hit our shores around 2019. That's almost 4 years ago, or thereabouts. And when it arrived, I dived into it, and wow, I was overwhelmed. And then, over time, two things happened that the ring did not intend. One, I guess I got smarter, at least a little bit. And two, a lot of extracurricular materials started forming on the internet horizon that helped augment my learning curve to the point that I could bring it back again last year and this year, coupled with some really great resources on how to learn the game that honestly have just opened... Oh wait, I'm getting into my review. Let's just take a look at it now. Let's take a look at what comes in the box of Nevsky. You get this board. It's a somewhat compact board in contrast to some of the other fare, but is perfectly sized for what to encompass much more room for some of the other accentuated pieces that you're going to get. This covers the Teuton side and the Rus side, and it's split in half because that's how it goes. This is friendly to the Rus, friendly to the Teutons. You also get, as part of the board here, you get this timer. This is sort of a multi-purpose sort of time board. It's going to give you each of these blocks represents 40 days. You've got your tracks for levying and campaign, victory point tracks, service notes, who can actually be mustered in, who, how long they're going to last, etc. So that goes on. Each of these lords, and you're going to play with a lot of lords, good lord, is going to have its own faceplate, its own mat. These are nice thick mats, and it's going to have information about that will be relevant to you during play. In this case, on the Teutonic side, we have 3 different lords, each with their own set of units, and these units come in. There's a whole host of units and tokens and such that come inside. Now, the wooden pieces represent different variant types of units, and then there are tokens for ravaging and coin and provender and loot. Give a hoot, eat your loot. Okay, and this is player aid, which kind of shows you what all those pieces are, what they represent. And then, as importantly as that, as these lords and lord cards, you have command cards. These are going to be used to prepare a plan. That plan is going to be which of your lords are going to activate, how many they can activate based on the season. And then you're going to get Art of War cards, and these are custom cards for each side that give some events and special abilities. The events will trigger at points in the game, and then the capabilities, that's the top half. The bottom half are capabilities. You can bring those in during your turn, and you get your choice too. So you can have some license as to how those are brought in. That's it. Each lord has their own little group of cylinders and dies. You have like vassals. These are pieces. These are sub-troops, vassals that you can bring in once again as part of an action in order to bolster your forces. And then the other important thing, of course, is the transport. The transport situation and the capabilities of what you can transport, how you can transport, what happens when you run out of room to transport is all taken care of here. When you have carts and provender, coins, sleds, ships, boats, there's a whole cacophony of various things. Also, you have the rule book. The rule book is very well, it's a very good rule book, we'll put it that way, and it covers pretty much everything you're going to need to know. It's very precise, which means that you're going to be you're going to want to be very particular about reading it very rigidly to understand some of the rules that go on, because this is a very different kind of game than what you may have come to expect, whether you're a new person coming into this or whether you've played a lot of war games before. Everyone gets a command sheet. You've seen this already, but it's a 4-sided command sheet. It gives you a ton of information, including the ever-important sequence of play. And of course, as well, because this is GMT and they love to do this, and this is one of the favorite parts, is the background book. This will give you an example of play. Tells you, goes through a whole scenario of how to play, what all the different sub phases in the game, and there are many sub phases. And then it goes in and gives you the historical information that I absolutely love. I eat this stuff up. It's great to kind of get that so that you can sort of set the stage in your mind of what you're playing and why and how it worked out in history. And then a very valuable breakdown of each of the shots and each of the cards that's going to be advantageous to you. All right, let's get into an example of play. Okay, so to clarify for this playthrough, this is, Nevsky is not a game that you can do a full-on playthrough without considerable, deliberate, bit-by-bit, piece-by-piece thought. And so this is going to be a general overview of how to play. It's not going to be a concerted playthrough. Thankfully, in the years since 2019, when Nevsky shipped, a large volume of videos and play guides and written material has been made in order for people who want to learn this game, because it is not necessarily the easiest game that I've found to learn, not because of the game, but because just of the framework of how different it is and how many details that need to be accounted for. Whether it's worth it or not, well, stay tuned for my final thoughts. That said, we're going to talk about what the general purpose is. The general purpose in this game is to win. You win by scoring victory points. Victory points are achieved over the course of several of these turns. And on each of these turns, you're going to have different scenarios. I set it for the most basic scenario, but in general, you can play the whole thing, all of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, up to 16 rounds of turns of gameplay. And the best way to break down how Nevsky plays for both sides is to effectively consider it what exactly is, which is the first installment of the Levy and Campaign system. What that means is that in the middle of a turn, you're going to do Levy, Campaign, Levy, Campaign, Levy, Campaign, Levy, Campaign. It's got a rhythm to it. It's a real nice rhythm. And and neither of these large sort of splits of the actions that you take are trivial. This is not a, hey, the first Levy takes less time obviously than Campaign, because campaigning is going to bring you down into the depths of movement, of coordination, of battle, etc. But the Levy portion is not to be diminished either. What that means, and we'll start off, is that we'll just go through a little example. When you start playing, each round, when you start, and you'll move this Levy, Campaign, Levy, Campaign, Levy, Campaign. You handle the Arts of War card. So basically, other than the first round, you're going to take 2 of these randomly, and they're going to become capabilities. That's an oddity. So for example, you look and go, oh, no capability, man, that sucks. And the Teutons almost always go first, and then the Russian follow a suit. And then in this case, the bottom half, well, for this is an example, halberders, this lord's sergeants, and each of these lords is indicated here. These are the only 2 lords on the side, the Teuton side, that can actually have this card be applied to them. This lord's sergeants and men-at-arms have armor +1. Well, I don't have them right now, so that sucks to be me. On the other hand, the custom deck for the wow, no capabilities again. Then you can any, which is nice, so I can basically, you know what, I'm going to give this to you. You can have up to 2 per lord, and there you go. This lord with light or Asiatic horse may ravage adjacent locales. That's a powerful one. We'll talk about that later. But that's the start of it all. Like every round you do this. Now, after turn 1, instead of capabilities, you're going to flip them over and do the events. So forget that bottom part, just do the top part. An example for this one on calendar: shift Knut enable or their service up to 1 box. This levy no muster over by them. That's a pretty devastating one. That kind of hampers them pretty badly. And historically, you can read up about it from Voldemort, Danish unrest after king's death. So again, such tremendous amounts of resources and material here. Then you do what's called pay, and this is a pretty consistent thing. You can always pay your units. Why are you paying your units? Because these units, this is not a game where you just go, hey, I have these units, I move them about the map, we fight, I roll dice, someone wins. No, these units they have a mind of their own. Think of each lord as having a mind and a duration of their own. And you must decide to either pay them in coin, which Gavrilo has coin. If they're in same locations, you can use the coin for more than one lord. But in general, in this coinage, you're going to be like, if I pay, then I get to move the service marker 1 step over. Now, why would I do that? Because these service markers indicate how long these lords are going to bother messing with your war. And if ever a time comes when we get to here, if you can't pay these units, or if you choose not to pay these units during a levy, during the time when those levying is going on, if you can't do it, then they're gone. They come off the map. All the units are gone. They just disappear. They vanish into thin air because they got to go home and basically take care of business at home. Yes. And so that's why it's so incredibly important to consider that. That's an aspect of levy that you're not going to want to underestimate. And you can pay by coin. You can pay coin anywhere. You can pay by loot. Loot is another resource, and loot is something you get as a result of, well, various aspects in the game. And when you have loot, which I don't think I have any right now, that shows the loot. Give a hoot. Eat your loot. When you have these around, if you're at a friendly location and a lord has to be either in their own area, for example, all of these lords have to be in this side, or in a conquered zone on the other side. And again, I'm not going to go over every little detail. There's a ton of details as far as what the rules are for different things, all of which make actual sense. But they were, it took me some time to gather that. So anyway, so loot is one example of something that you might want to pay to keep them in service, because that's the point. You either pay the piper or the piper takes his pipe and goes away. And so for both of these sides, like for example, for the Newton side, they go through, they do this thing, they decide, do we want to extend service? Are we doing okay? I mean, we're fine with this lord right now because we got some room. We got till the end of the early winter phase here in order to be able to worry about paying them. Sometimes it matters, sometimes it don't. It's all kind of a judgment call you have to make as the guy at the top, making choices for your employees, and they're fickle and they come and go, etc., etc. Also, if you ever have a situation where these are lower or back and you move it over, not only are they gone, they're gone forever. They're removed from the game. And so that's something to consider too. Whereas if they just disappear at the turn, you can remuster them later and they will return with all of their units. And so there's some strategy there and some tactics that might not seem obvious at first. And then once we do that, then we have muster, and muster is the phase where all of these lords get to do a muster action. What muster they do? Well, it depends on where they are, etc., etc. But in friendly, they have to be in a friendly locale in order to be able to do this. So that's another thing. Once again, your positioning on the map is important. If you have, for example, it made strides here, but you don't have a friendly locale, you haven't conquered, say, any of this, then their muster is just not going to cut the mustard. And so think on that when you're considering these things and playing this game for real. But the things you can do, or you can try and get another one of these guys in, and that's a die roll against their fealty. For example, if we were trying to get Rudolph in, we'd have to roll a 5 or less. We'd do it, so we'd be able to bring in Rudolph. Rudolph would start at his seat. There's always a starting place where there's sort of their home front that they would start. You would bring in all of those materials in, and they wouldn't get to do their own muster at that point. They got to wait a turn. That's just not fair. That's one thing they could do. The other thing they could do, and this is very important, is add transport. Transport is hugely important here because this game simulates the idea that you're going to need to feed your crew any time they move and any time they fight. And that can include even if they're sieged, because that's how you kind of wear them down. And so provender is the food that you're going to have. Now, generally speaking, that's what you want mostly to be able to use to consume. And so you need carts in order to move them. And that's an interesting, well, to me it's interesting part, is that you have to have enough carts to be able to provide for the provender that you're carrying as well. But it gets even more tricky, because you can't just buy, I'll buy as many carts as there are provender. Because Nevsky takes place over the course of years, and certain things happen called weather. And whether or not you care, that weather is going to be there for you. So you must weather the storm, whether you like it or not. The key is here, you'll notice that this is a point-to-point game, and so you're not dealing with hexes or grids, you're dealing with locations here. And it sort of gives a nice legend. You've got your castle, fort, trade routes, you've got your towns and stuff. But you have your ways. We have ways of making you... Anyway, waterway, lakeshore river, and trackway. Now what's interesting is that not only is it just, you're on the road, you're in the river, That's actually a consideration. Right now it's summer, so you're pretty safe. But in the summer, you're going to be being able to go, okay, if I want to move here, for example, and I have two carts, I have a provender, whatever, like I can move one. I mean, I have, sorry, you get lordship command of one. So your service, yeah. Service section 2 lords. Yeah, so in this case, when that happens, I'll be able to move command of 2. So I can move down here, but in order to move down here and bring my provender, I'm going to have a cart to be able to take my little provender. Let's just simulate this. Let's just go. Put it all in the carts. Come, Patsy. All right, and there we go. Now we have simulated the act of moving all of the food with us in order to feed our crew. Now that's great, but it isn't going to help us on the water, and so that we're going to have boats. And you'll see boats here. And so we would have to go, oh, well, if I'm going to go up this way, I'm going to go, etc. Sorry, here. And so the mode of transportation for your food matters and becomes of considerable importance as you decide these things, because you're planning ahead. The levy is also much about planning. And so you want to, when you're mustering, for example, I only have one thing to do here. So in this case, he might muster and go, whatever. I shouldn't. Loot is interesting, and loot is another one where loot always makes you laden, because this actually simulates like cattle and all kinds of stuff that moves really, really slow. What does laden mean? It means you have to spend 2 command to move one leg of a journey instead of one leg at a time. So you definitely want to be mindful when you have loot. On the other hand, if you can bring the loot back, you can pay with loot to keep people there longer because they like their loot. Anyway, so that's one of the things you do. And the other thing is you can add a capability card. And this is great because you don't need to randomly grab 5 and pick one. You can just pick one. And there are certain ones that, cogs, for example, is great. Yeah, and that's, it's great if you're going to plan on any sea travel. For example, up here, we have a lord here at a seaport. And if they want to travel by ship, and they have ships, and that's another form of transportation. They can move to any other seaport, which means they could do this, hey, I'm going to attack you here. Of course, when you get there, you're going to need provender. And that means that before you ship, you're going to have to look and go, well, do I have enough ships for, to move all the stuff I need to move? Well, currently, no. Or wait, yes, they do. And ships are interesting. No, you actually have to think of moving your units, because the ship here has, capacity for bringing your units, like obviously putting horses on ships, yeah, a little volatile, etc. So there's some rules there about how you can move and do these sort of land or ship engagements. Again, I'm not going to go too deep on that, just to understand that there are logistics to be understood there, and some of the capability cards are going to help you with that or simplify your life if that's the route you're going to take. You don't have to. It's all about what you choose to do at this level of planning, but that's what you can do. And those are the 3 things that you can do during the levy phase when it comes time to mustering actions, not units. The other thing you can do in muster, we already talked about that, or maybe we didn't, is to muster, and this is very important, is to muster one of your vassals. Now, these are sort of units in waiting. They don't have to be brought into play, and they usually aren't at the start. But it's very important because when you bring your unit into play, you're going to add forces. And again, you can see these forces have varying levels of importance. Like this says, I can bring up to 2 of these militia in. So obviously you can see the importance and the value there when it comes to battle. Knights are great in battle, etc. And then down the list, horsemen in all the different phases. And so you can muster that troop, and there are advanced rules that add more to it. But in general, I like to play with the basic rules on this because you're just bringing units in. Now, why wouldn't you just bring them all in at once? Because you also have to be mindful that if you have more than 7 units, you're going to have to pay additional food because you have more units. So as long as you have 6, then whenever you only have to pay 1 for every move or battle action. If you have 7 units, you're going to have to pay 2. And so that can get pretty prohibitive. But you can see all of the vassals, all the units that can be brought into play
as a result of the mustering. And finally, there's a call to arms phase, and that's a little tricky. The Novgorod, the Rus have different rules for just a kind of a little bit of a bonus action that you can accomplish. You can pay victory points actually to enhance, to increase service of your units, to just be flat out be able to muster a lord without even having to roll for it, to remuster again. And then on the other side, you have what's called the legat. And if you have a certain card in play, you can bring them into play. They're going to boost or help out wherever they're at by being able to, again, auto muster lords. You can slide cylinders. You can improve service for people, and you can basically boost wherever you're at, and then they go back on the card, etc. So that's another side thing to take into account. All right, so that's it. That's the levy that I'm describing to you. And then what is this for? Well, all this happens, the whole point of getting all your troops ready and building out your units, all that, is the next phase, which is campaign. And again, we start with the Teutonic side when we do this, and there's a few housekeeping things, but in general, this is your plan. And the plan part is really cool too, because every one of your lords you can add cards to. And because I added, for example, Rudolph, then I can take his cards and I can add them in. And so you're going to have, anyway, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All of the active lords are not, and pass cards. Where's our pass card? There we go. All of our active lords currently are able to be in this queue of actions. And I know I'm mangling a little bit, but work with me here. The purpose of this is to be able to get rid of this card. There we go. I did find that. So you build up and you say there's 6 cards right now that each side is going to play. And so you decide which of these cards you're going to play and in what order they're going to be played. So we have 4 lords out here right now. And we have pass cards. This is where you're like, you know what, if I play my cards right, there might be a turn where I want to wait and then react to whatever my opponent is doing. So for example, I want Yaroslav to go first. So I'm going to put him here because I think if he can get in here and start sieging, that would be great. Then I'm hoping that the Rus don't do anything too crazy, and then I will have, oh wait, Rudolph's not in. Never mind. Let's just pretend he's not in. Then we'll have Knut and Abel go next, because they're up there, and maybe I could pull off something interesting and have them start making their way over here to kind of split the attentions. And then let's have Herman go next, and maybe he could join up and see if he can make his way into siege. And then let's have a pass. And maybe we'll all be nestled in. We'll wait and see what our enemy does. And then Yaroslav again. And then Herman. Yeah, I like that plan. That is a good plan. So what you do is yeah, this is where you got to make sure you remember, because it's like you can look at these over time, but you order them in a certain way. So let's say Yaroslav is first, Knut Abel second, Herman's third, pass is fourth. There we go. And now we have the order of our plan here. And the Russian side is going to do the same thing. I'm not going to go through all that stuff, but let's just say that that's what happens. And then once everyone's created a plan, then you execute the plan. And that's it, right? No, it gets trickier than that. So we're just going to say, forget it. So the Teuton start and they go, okay, Yaroslav goes first. And this is where it gets even cooler, because you have a whole battery of different actions that you can play. And what are those actions? Well, you can do, it's all on the sheet, and boy, the sheet is valuable. In the sheet, you have march, and you're going to be marching to places. Again, there are rules on whether how many commands it takes, on how much you can bring with you. The only time you can get rid of loot and provender and stuff like that is if you actually have to get rid of it in order to be able to move. So you can't just ditch stuff willy-nilly. Siege, which is where you actually go against one of these boxed in locations, and that will create a siege for whoever's inside. Sometimes lords are inside, sometimes they're not. As you can see, Novgorod with its three boxes is like the biggest example of a place that if you can pull that off, that's 3 victory points. That's huge. Storm, which is when you're basically going, forget the siege, we're going to go in with our units and try to basically just storm the castle. Sally, she comes out whenever she's stuck in. Sorry. Sally means you're bringing your forces that are stuck in a place out and being able to like go, let's take the battle to them, and tries to win there. Supply is a way that you can configure your carts and your whatever to be able to go back and try and get to back to where your seat is. For example, like supply wise, if I could go here, I could supply as long as I could get a cart from one of my carts, which I have here, to be able to get back here where I have a seat listed. I can get supplies. That's going to be helpful when I'm going out and going, okay, I need supplies to last here, and I don't necessarily want to forage. But what's wrong with forage? Well, nothing, especially in the summer. Forage means that you can go add provender from wherever you're at, for the cost of an action. Each lord has a set of commands that they can use, and so you might use one of them to forage and another one to move, for example. Forage gets a little trickier when it's not the summer, because then you have to be at a friendly stronghold to be able to forage, and so it gets a little bleak in the winter, but that makes sense. Ravage is a way to just leave devastation and mess with people badly. There's some rules about it, but in general, you don't want to ravage where you might want to forage, but you do want to ravage because it's basically a half a victory point wherever you go. You can ravage, and there's certain rules about where you can, but in general, that's one of the valuable and quick things to do is just ravage the snot out of stuff, and when you do, then you're going to get provender, and possibly loot. So, and then sail was what we were talking about, where you can take a sail action, takes your entire card, and you go all the way to some other port, and you get there, and you can even siege a place when you get there if you want. And then tax is a way to get coin. It's very rare to get coin. Is not easy to acquire, and so if you are at your own seat, you can tax, and that will give you a coin, which is nice. Or you can pass, and again, passing is an action by which you do absolutely nothing, but then your heart will go on, and so will any siege, etc., etc. And these are the actions that you're going to take, and so you're going to take whatever lord that you've chosen. You're going to do, for example, here and here. That's 2 movements. Got 2 carts. So you can carry the provender, and his 2 actions are basically going here and here, and that immediately creates a siege condition, and then you would put a siege marker, and I will do that now when I find it. And there's levels of siege that you can do. And now that it's in siege, the rules change, and now our friend here is going to basically be trying to roll in future turns, or in future card play. There's a possibility to try to get that particular place, especially if there's no lord in it, to just give up. And if that happens, then you gain control, you conquer it, you get victory points for it, etc. But you also have to feed at the end of your turn. If you ever did any moving or battling, then you're going to note that, and be able to say, okay, all of you, so everyone involved, even on the other side where someone comes in, if we, for example, the sword had been here or whatever, and there was any fight, or any condition where it was required that they moved or fought, they would have to pay. And what happens if you don't pay? Well, it's not good. In this case, we have enough to pay this time, but we're going to have to figure out something for subsequent actions to be able to make sure that if we move or fight or continue the siege, that we pay. And so that's a very big consideration. If that doesn't happen, then our good friend here has to go back. And that means that whenever we go to the next levy, not only is he gone, he's gone forever. And so we kind of put ourselves in a weird spot in that case. But that's the actions. He gets 2 actions. He takes us 2 actions, and then we move on. In the course of battle, it gets very, very interesting, because battle is not simply just fighting. And in battle, you would basically pit, say, these forces against those forces. For example, say Yaroslav and Gavrilo were here, or yeah, or any of the lords, frankly. Don't want to fight Domash. He may sound like a Domash, but he's actually pretty smart, and he's got lots of good stuff. So anyway, so Yaroslav and Gavrilo, say they're going against each other in battle. There's a whole sequence of play that occurs. You array these lords, you play events. You might have event cards that come up that you can use to kind of like surprise someone in battle. And then you have choices to make, like, if you're going to concede, which is kind of, there's a lot of terms here: concede, withdraw, retreat, etc. Lots of details that go on in the battle portion of this game. It's almost its own mini game. And so you go in and you're like, okay, like, am I going to concede? If you concede, then you get to keep your self-esteem and and some more loot, or sort of more of the things that you have you can bring with you. When you concede, go back. If it's in a siege, and so many different situations you're going to run into. If you're fighting in a battle in the middle of a field, conceding means you can run away. And if you're sieging, trying to storm a fort, or a stronghold, then there's different rules on that as far as what happens when you win or lose, concede, reposition, etc. When you do that, yeah, you're sort of preparing to go, okay, I think I'm going to lose, but I'm going to go ahead and concede. If you don't concede, then the really harsh circumstances if you lose, including up to the complete dissolution of that lord and all of its armies, and lots of spoils given to your other side. So that's a very interesting decision. That's not just as simple as, I give up, I'm going to retreat at the end of combat. You have to decide at the first part of combat. And if you do concede, then you also have to basically only do half hits as you're running away. It's an orderly retreat versus a chaotic retreat, basically. And then you do the strikes, and the strikes get interesting because you have different phases. You have your archery attack, and this flows just like you can imagine in your mind a battle would flow. You got your archery, and they're throwing their stuff out there, whoosh, whoosh. And then if you've got in a stronghold, you've got considerations of that, siege works, etc. Then you've got your melee, and you got your defending horsemen, and they're like the big guns, and you send them. Then you got your regular foot troops, and it all happens in this sort of cadence, this beautiful cadence that occurs, wherein you're attacking, defending, attacking, and the order matters. The defenders do their strike before the attackers. This isn't a simultaneous play here. And so if the defenders do a good job of like whittling down the attacking forces, they can really give themselves a nice advantage and before they even have to take a hit. And that's how it works here. The thing to understand is that in this game, there's you are always going to do the maximum possible hits your units will allow you for a given phase. For example, if anything has archers, like an archer phase, and these are special abilities that come up, special cards that are in play. I forget which ones they are, but there's ones that basically add, as you can see, like archery capabilities. They go first, and they're always going to do their maximum hit. Well, then what's the fun in that? I guess it's all predicted, right? This is predictive technology. No, not exactly. Because even though your units are going to strike with whatever they're allowed to for their hits, it's the defensive side that determines how that plays out as far as is taking those hits. And so by that I mean, for example, let's say that there were 3 hits, crazy amount. Say we did the archery and there was a hit. Everything's rounded up. 1 hit. Well, if Yaroslav hits in that phase for, say, 1 point, let's just say 1 point, then the defender gets to decide and say, well, what can I do to try and absorb that? Well, he's got options. You'll notice the protection column here. And so a knight can roll, and on a roll of 1 to 4, he's protected. Then sergeants, same thing, 1 to 3. And some of these, there's protection of different kinds, and then there's evasion. So you can either absorb, evade, or you might have unarmored, in which case you're probably going to lose. Some of you may die. And so say, for example, that I wanted to absorb a hit. I could choose the militia and go, look, one armored, I got to roll a 1 or less. Didn't quite do it. And so you just take that you take that hit and absorb it with this unit, and so they get taken out of the fray so that you can keep your valuable horsemen. On the other hand, you could take a risk and go, well, I'm pretty sure my horseman, I'm going to roll 1 to 4 for my knight. Okay, that would have been bad. I would have lost my knight, so that was a bad tactical move, but how can I know? That's where the random unpredictability comes in play. You're always going to do your full attack, but it's how the defender the absorber of that damage decides to absorb the damage and the risks taken there that decide what happens. So what happens if you lose your units? Well, it's not all lost. You go into the routed column, and they are routed. Does that mean they're out of the game? No, their router's still working. Check your internet connection. No, instead they go into the routed spot, and that's not great for the current battle, but and especially not great if all their units are routed. Then that lord is out of action. But when we're playing this combat, and you're going back again, you're going into these phases where you've got the archery phase, defender and attacker, then the horse phase, and so the attacker that's left would do 2 points of damage, and then Yaroslav would have to figure out what to do there, etc. And then you do this phase, defender, attacker, etc. And at the end of the battle, or at the end of the battle, when either one side wins or one side loses, again, we didn't go into anything like the city attack, or sort of the stronghold attacks, whether you're storming, whether you're open field battle, whether you're sallying from there, whether you're, how you do, if you have multiple units on the same side. There's a handy little placard that kind of tells you, that you can help out with that, where you can just move all your units, or you move your lords there, and you've got flanking, very simple flanking rules, but very effective. They're nicely balanced, where 2 lords can gang up on the others. So there's a lot of pieces and details going on, but it all flows smoothly. So at the end of battle, all of your routed units, depending on how you left, if you did a concede, you can roll with that same number and try to get them back into the fray. So, for example, for our knight here, because I rolled 1 to 4, and that's the protection, he's back in the game. Whereas in this guy, 1, nope, he's out, so he's gone. Bye-bye. However, if you don't concede, then everything has to roll a 1 to try to survive. So that really robs you of your chances. And that's it. That's one example of a battle that can take place across this panorama of different choices. And so, again, we're going to go through the command cards. Yaroslav, Gavrilo. Then we're going to do, Newt and Abel, and they might want to go over here and start sieging here or ravaging. Herman might want to go here and ravage with his actions, etc. In the meantime, the Russians are going to try and bring their units in play, whatever. I'm not doing this as a playthrough to show you skill. I'm doing this as a playthrough to kind of give you an example of all the things that you're going to run into and contend with when you play Nevsky and such. I don't think it's not a tight example, but then again, I will be putting links below in this video of some extensive and astounding playthroughs, and as well as the online game now that's in progress, the Rally of the Troops website. You can play this with the rules intact. You can play on Vassal as well, but there's just a lot of places now where you can learn this game in a ton of the details that I glossed over as to what, in order to be able to play smartly. You can kind of fathom how to play the game with this playthrough, but to play smartly, you're going to want to take advantage of the many resources of Nevsky material available. And that's that. That is the game of Nevsky. Now let's get into my final thoughts.
Okay, final thoughts on Nevsky after all these years. Okay, seriously, we're going to do as always the cons, then the pros, and then my final thoughts. Although I do want to mention one thing that I did not cover. Again, there's no way even a half hour can do justice to all of the nuance and details and just just gameplay aspects of this game. But the one thing I should mention is that I didn't really emphasize the roads being so important, or the travel, the transport. Different seasons create different you've got different pathways, as you saw. I explained that, but in the different seasons it requires a different mode of transportation, and so that's another aspect of play that I didn't really go through in that, but that is pivotal and impacting to understand and to do. So that aside, let's get into the cons. Again, I think I already hinted to this when I first started talking about it, in that I have not been really good at going off the beaten path when it comes to learning. I tend to be someone who needs to see something, go over it, repetition a couple times. That was hard to do, even with the gameplay sessions that I was involved with back in 2019 and 20. I understood it from a technical level as far as what to do. It isn't convoluted by any stretch, not even close. It's just very, very much a detailed new system, and it wasn't easy for me personally to learn. It took many tries. Many almost got it, almost figured it out, many years. And that's not unlike some of the other stuff that the designer Volko has done, where I've been like, why is this so hard for me to understand? I really struggled. I think the first really asymmetric game was Labyrinth, The War on Terror. And that was like maybe 10 pages of rules, maybe. And I still struggle with that just because of trying to wrap my head around it. That's not a game problem, that's a me problem. But for others who are not really, really smart, intelligent people, who are just kind of like, I like this, I like this arena, this type of style, but I'm not necessarily really good or really speedy at picking it up. Something to consider. Back then it was a lot more difficult. And Coin was another one where you're like, wait a minute, like, with Labyrinth it's like, wait a minute, like, you can do this, but I can't do that, but you're gonna, like, we have two totally different things we can do. And then Coin was like, okay, we all have different things we can do. There's some similarities in the structure, but in general, and then the idea with Coin Games, the predecessor to this series, being like, wait a minute, like, you can have the same, it's the same region and the same people are there, like, you've got your enemies in the same, I did a whole what is a coin game years ago. It's still the second most watched and most still watched video I made, because people are really excited about it. So the Levy and Campaign series was one where I'm like, yes, another system. Okay, I figured out Labyrinth, I figured out Coin Games, I have them all. I don't know. There was something about it that for me was just very tricky to try to grapple with and understand at first. And part of it's, again, it's me. When you're going to learn this game, your preconceptions need to be shunted about what you're come to expect. Even if you're a war gamer and you're like, there are hexes, there are units, there are facings, there are combat results tables, there are charts, there are graphs, there's, whatever. That's not this, because this is, you need to kind of mind warp yourself to be able to realize here this, radical concept of Levy and Campaign. And so that's something to be mindful of. Again, I don't ding the game for it at all. There's no way I could. It's like saying, like, I don't understand the color purple, so the Mona Lisa must suck. Now that's not how it works. And I love the color purple. I figured that one out. The next one is, some people are not going to necessarily be pleased with the fact that it's, at times you're going to feel like part accountant, part home ec teacher, and part jaded playground mom, when you're dealing with all these different facets of medieval warfare in that particular area. And because battle, if you're just in a hurry to get to battle, this is not likely to be the game that's going to maybe capture your interest the way it would for someone who wants the whole holistic picture of medieval warfare. Because all the other subsystems in this game are first-class systems that feed into the success of the others. They all work together in this wonderful, gear and pulley system that just meshes together in, I'm getting into my review again, into great ways. So again, if you're someone who's like, I just really like battles kind of thing, you're going to like the battles here, but that's not the end-all be-all point. Your point is not to take your killer stack from, like, Heroes of Might and Magic, trounce them on and go bam, 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 bam. That's not what it is. There's so much going on here, and everything else is significantly important enough that it's not going to be cast aside to go, forget it, for the Alliance. Ready to serve. Anyway, that's that. And then the other thing is, again, you're going to have to grapple. It kind of feeds into the accountant thing, but you're going to have to grapple with sort of the feeding, feeding and maintenance and all that stuff, the accountant part. I'm just going to stress that again. This is something that I feel is perfected in Agricola, for example. The cry of anguish over, the underfeeding of your hungry mouths. Well, in Agricola, you're going to lose VP. In Nevsky, if you're not careful, you're going to lose entire armies as they ship back going, we kind of like to be fed if we're going to do something for you. And, this is a game, again, that if you're not careful, you can mismanage the future in stuff. So the other thing is just details. There's a lot of details here. There's a lot of details that nest into other details that nest into other details. And so don't be in a hurry. That's my advice of anything. If you're going to play this game, don't be in a hurry. Unless you're a speedy mind like a Mark Herman versus Volko and, head-to-head combat, and I'm like 20 degrees below in the intelligence spectrum. Honestly, just don't hurry. Learn it. Enjoy this. Again, I'm getting into my review panorama, because there's a lot of context. Even if you know the rules, there are contexts that change what happens based on the rules, all smartly, all intelligently, but you got to be careful about that and not go, try and just assume that everything just follows this set of rules no matter what. The context changes. A siege, a storm, a sally, two lords in the same space, one lord, where you're at, what you can do, how you can ravage here but not here, how you conquer here but not here, how you do sailing, how you handle your provender distribution, etc. If you're not careful, you can and will shoot yourself in the provender. Mistakes can be hugely costly, and I'm not, and I'm not counting the like one of my original games where I literally lost everyone on the battlefield on my side because, I guess you did need coin. Oh, it was that turn that I needed to actually pay you? Oh, I'm sorry, I'll get my accountant on that. Well, we'll be home if you need us. So, anyway. And that's the thing, that's the cons that I can see, and mostly it's just a matter of don't go into this lightly thinking that you're going to play Memoir 44 with armor, or with, armor, shields, a sword, a paladin, and coconuts clucking for your cavalry. Anyway, pros. So let's get into what I like about this game, as if I haven't already bled through that anyway. This Levy and Campaign series is revolutionary because it is something very unique. It's a sandwich game. It's, at many games they take you to this high strategic level. You're moving, commanding mass armies around, and you get nothing of the underneath. None of the details. None of the lint under the fridge that you have to worry about. You're just like, move fridge here. And that's great. And then you've got the eye level. You take it all the way to the other extreme, and you've got eye level, where like it's Memoir 44. I use that again, or any unit where you're like moving, you literally move this tank from here to here over this 300-yard thing. This is a new approach of middle management warfare, per se. It basically takes the part in the middle, applies it to a context that's like beautifully crafted to it. These two contour together, the Levy and Campaign system and the middle-aged warfare fit in just lockstep. Even the simple act of moving, for example, like this is again not the don't be in a hurry thing. Even the simple act of moving feels a bit like Mage Knight, if you've ever played that, where it's just like, I've got these cards, I've got to use them all just right. I've got to optimize it so I can even move like 2 hexes, and stuff, where you're eking out the optimal hand to move and act. This presents you with, to be honest, an arduous task of coordinating, stockpiling, navigating, and being prepped, but not over-prepped, in just the right ways. Nevsky brings life and substance to that phase of the game that's usually just hand-waved away, like, check supply, cool, kind of thing. And that's what makes it astounding. And let's go over it again. The Levy campaign system is just nice. Levy and Campaign. Levy and Campaign. I can make a song. I could be a rapper. A very bad rapper. Levy. When you come to the Levy phase, again, the theme is outstanding. Yes, you are literally like I gotta figure all this out before we get to battle. There's a lot of work to be done. It's gonna take a while. Yeah, I gotta do my taxes. Everyone steer clear. But that theme just plays through so well. On the Teutonic side, you've got the legates, and sort of their little beefy, and then that's their input, and then the Rus have the Vichy, and they've got Alexander, and they've got the rules about tension and what went on in that battle and the historical thing. You've got various lords, and they have their personalities. You see their personalities kind of with the basic stats that they have, but also the vassals that they can bring in, and sort of their propensities of being able to have certain things available to them in the way of carrying, transport, etc. And this constant balancing of provender with the effective use of command, with like feeding your troops, how you feed your troops, what's a smart move. You literally feel like you're down there, like on this map, just like planning out what you're gonna need, roll back, and doing, there's a proverbial story about how Napoleon could manage a battle down to the amount of weapons or amount of bullets. He was that very, very intricate and detailed. That's kind of what being asked to do here, is to kind of really plan out as many things of the known as possible. This game doesn't have a ton of unknowns. It does, but it doesn't. It's not like I have no idea what I'm getting into, so I need to prepare for anything. That's at least you have some steering for what you could possibly expect, And then there's the taxing and looting choices that come up frequently. Like, yes, I need to tax, and this was something that early on you're gonna forget. Like, I totally missed. Like, this is a game you should fail fast, because the more you fail, the more you'll fail less, and then eventually you'll get it. At least that was how it worked for me. You're taxing, it can be very taxing to try to remember to be taxing people, or loot, and like, oh, I've got this loot, but loot is a funny thing. Loot sounds awesome, except what it really is just beef with legs. And you're like, okay, well, I got to get everyone back to friendly territory or a friendly location, and then the loot can be my money. Makes it a little more cumbersome, but in thematic sense it does. Like, yeah, I got some loot. I grabbed the spoils of war, and then with the tax, and then you do all this levying, and then you muster your vassals, then mustering your other lords, bringing to bear more might, more things to help, but with a long-term plan for managing their comings and goings. That is not a task that you can just sleep on and go, yeah, push a bunch of buttons, whatever, and then and then you get to the battle plan. And the battle plan is like this: okay, we've done everything logistically. Accountant Fred has put his pen back in his pocket. He's ready to kind of figure out all the best ways that he can to be ready. And then you do the planning phase, which is kind of a misnomer, because you're planning, but you don't really know how the order is going to play out. That's the intent, really, is to kind of replicate the fact that we're not going to know perfect information on the battlefield. And so you do all that, and then you have these best laid plans in hopes that you guess the guesswork of your opponent's guesses. And it's simply presented and orchestrated. It's it's mind taxing, but it's not like, oh, I gotta think all these things. No, it's just like, which 6 cards are you going to play out? How are you going to organize stuff in the hope that you can sort of think it's almost like Colt Express. Like, how are you going to program your turns? Well, how are you going to have your guys go in the order that you hope is not going to be disrupted or heavily impacted, at all? Because it's simply presented and orchestrated, but it's a really important part of the game, as activation order triggers are undeniably tense, and the slightest miscalculation or incorrect guess on the part of what your opponent's orders are going to be and what order they're going to be can heavily impact your subsequent effectiveness as you're going through these. You're going to have to steer off and go, well, my plan A didn't work out. Let's get to plan D. And this isn't the first game that has a sort of stacking planning. I know that the I think Angora was a game that the designer suggested was something that he used as heavy inspiration for it. I've seen it in like Forbidden Stars, and even Victorian Masterminds and whatever, where like you sort of like you build the stack, and then you trigger the not stack, but you this queue, and then you trigger the queue, this interleaved queue, and you hope for the best. And it works really well. It really does, in a very simple way, just present to you the uncertainties of the battlefield. So that's the levy part. Then you get into the campaign part. This is the part that's more conventional insofar as it has things that you're probably familiar with other games of its type. And then you get into the campaign, and then you get the meter. Then you get all of those things that you did in the levy are what unlock what you can do in the campaign portion, and it's gloriously presented. It really is. I mean, you've got They take their turn in kind. They do their moves, their action. I mean, you saw the matrix of things to do. It's epic level of stuff that you can do, all contextual, all sensible. Starting with the map. I mean, the map, it's not the largest map. It's not meant to just blow you away with its massive size. It presents all the right details, no more, no less. It doesn't feel cluttered, but at the same time, it has all the information you need, and it's wonderfully gorgeous artwork, by the way. And I actually like the box, man. I actually like it. I'm not going to lie. I think it's very evocative. I know some people are like, oh, why does this guy look like... I'm like, I like it, so whatever. Art's subjective, and so am I. But I feel very steeped in its world as I'm playing this game. The landscape itself is fighting with or against you at all times. That's something to think about. Then they've got these nice thick Lord placards with all the information just set to just place all these things. I'm so glad they didn't just do, I'm glad that they use this sort of non-cube, non-cylinder pieces that are standard fare to kind of, and they use those just, even just the tiny, like, hey, these are knights and stuff, it just brings alive the battle a little bit more to me as they're playing out. The card capabilities, the card events, they're thematic, they're impacting. I can't say enough about the rulebook and the playbook. Again, every time I've gone back after I've understood, like Coin, or I've understood Labyrinth, or now that I've understood Nevsky, I go back and I go, yes, this really was a brilliant rulebook, a brilliantly presented, very precise, accurate rulebook in for the scope and breadth of what it was trying to teach. It was just me not ready to really understand it all yet. And the play guide with its very, very good example where it's going over a lot of things. It covers a lot of the major things. It has to, and you need that. Yeah, it's exceptional in every way, and the player aids are top notch. A lot, a couple games ago, I had a player aid that was literally just took sections of the rule book and put it on a player aid like that's going to help. It didn't. This tells you this is really good use of information. This is information science. 501. It works really well. And again, the moving of forces, I know I've mentioned this before, it kind of feels like Mage Knight, where you're moving. Each step that you take in moving is a deceptively simple action for what was a symphonic preparation required to get to that point where you're going, I'm moving here, am I laden, am I not laden? How do I manage these things to maximize how I can get to, but I don't want to get stuck because the next season I need to be able to muster. You've got so many things that go on just to be able to go, yes, now I'm ready to move. You've thought through 50 things behind the scenes to get to the point where you decide what you're going to do. And once you understand the choices, once you get just that what can I do, just tell me what I can do, and all the choices you can make and the context you can make them, and once those are all tallied, the next phase in learning this game, for those of us who have an adoration for it, is just levering the thematic, all the thematic pieces mightily and effectively, and doing so within the product of all their contexts in a smart way, to really go like how well you planned, how well you led your lords and their vassals, when to hold them, when to fold them, battle planning versus other means of acquiring victory points, for example, for winning, the constant weather impacts on the plans that you have. Because it matters, like when the roads open up, close up, change, or require different transport means, like you really have to keep on your toes for that. So, and let's get to battle. The battles are intricate and detailed and thematic and sensible, and really just showcase what you can do with just a little prompting to create a battlefield in your mind that really plays out like you've seen in the movies. You've got all of the aspects of battle in those times. You've got your open field battles, you've got your sieges, and they play out as you'd expect. You're sallying forth, and the risks involved. You're storming, and the major risks involved. Grouping up two of your or more of your units, versus spreading out. In the battle itself, when it's time to do battle, and it's not something you default to. You should decide the trade-offs and the risks involved in battle. It is not something to be taken lightly, Frodo Baggins. It unfolds into this full-on activity all its own, with both simplifications in places and then fine-tuned details that kind of fill in all of the richness of those simplified details all intermixed. The uniqueness of the unit types without having to have lookup cards for each one is great. There's a lot of different units with a lot of different abilities and stuff, plus all the capabilities you can provide for them as you go on. There's a 7-layer dip of depth here that's really efficiently mapped out to make it so that the battlefield plays out as quickly but as meatily as possible. The other thing I like is the simple the simple offensive power calculation. I love the one-sided, having one side be the actual unknown and the other side not. For example, like when you attack with your offensive weaponry, when it's time for you to do a turn, to do your portion of an attack, whether you're an attacker or a defender, you add it up and you say, there you go, I am serving you damage. And then then we get to the reactive unknowns of like, okay, well, I get to choose the unit, I get to choose, to take the risk on which ones I'm going to try to get to absorb this damage. I could theoretically get through this entire battle unfazed, or not. But if I do, am I going to risk the big knight, or am I just going to try to, assume that the fodder units that I brought in are going to be taking the hits? So. And that's cool, because you get just a nice deterministic, this is the damage I'm doing, but then you get this chaotic result in response. And it does, instead of having to go like, okay, I can roll 7 dice, I roll 7 dice, okay, you had 3 hits, I'm going to roll these defensive dice. It just removes that element and just says, we do full damage, you may or may not take all of it. And that's great. I think it's great to have that kind of, it simplifies, but it doesn't take away anything from the richness of the battle playing out, especially with the difference, like you got your archery, and then you got your cavalry, except in certain circumstances, and then you got your melee, and then you just go back and do it. I like the preemptive retreat conceding, because it makes you, and I've seen other games do this before, where it's like, okay, if you're going to quit, you have to at least get through this round. You're going to have to basically run and not get shot in the back as you're heading out, but at least you got a chance to kind of like run in an orderly fashion versus I'm here, this is kamikaze, I'm here or not. And then you have a much darker path if you lose or at least your lord does. And I love the authentic way that the lords route, and their, the way that they, even, there's always this chance that they can come back. It reminds me of Total War. If you've ever played Total War, in the video game, and like you have this overarching group of tactical strategic stuff. But when you get into battles, your units will be they're flanked. And then you start seeing them, and you see these little whole groupings leave, and they leave. But then every once in a while, you turn your attention elsewhere, and then they regroup and they come back, and you're like, what? That's kind of the same feeling. There is a possible, even if they rout, it's possible that they could reform. And that's just a nice touch. It's real quick, it's real easy, it's real sensible. It all adds up to this pitched battle of the mind with as little overhead as possible, but as much needed to really recreate the experience of a battle in every context in the Middle Ages. So that's what I have to say about that. And again, I speak back to the everything is a first-class opponent here. Whether is your opponent or your friend. When you're dealing with the seasons, you're having to plan ahead. You're dealing with the traversal of ways and pathways during those seasons. The impact it's going to have on your plans. Food is an opponent. Food is, it's braving the Nordic barren elements to bring victuals to the combatants. That brings challenges of its own that I found pretty invigorating. They're like, yes, or dang it, darn provender, grumble, grumble. And all of these things are downplayed. One interesting is that the Almoravid and Inferno, some of it, the weather in particular, is kind of downplayed, or the seasons, as far as how it affects ways. And I understand that. I think that makes sense in those universes. But I think here, it's so necessary for this game because of the context, the theme, the location, the timeline, to have that aspect here in its full glory, because otherwise it would be bereft of its brutal charm without all those considerations you have to make, thematically when you're up there and the seasons are changing. I don't know, anyway. And so ultimately, the best part of this game, Nevsky, after all these years, is that its brilliant design unfurls more and more over time. There's these detented steps of to materializing one's awareness of all of the just amazing details of this game that lie within. At first you're fumbling around just looking for a way to grapple with it all, and then you start to understand the critical importance of the major portions, the levying, the campaigning, and then you kind of start being, okay, now I'm going to be a tactician, and I'm going to organize a plan and outplan your nemesis, across the aisle. And then, you're simply activating all those things that you attempt and then seeing it miserably and spectacularly fail, at least if you're me. And then there's this bittersweet despondence when it all goes off the rails, knowing pretty much it was all your fault. Destiny couldn't care less in this case. This was all you going, I could have planned better, I could have done this better, which is kind of which means that you can get better. And then you start to feel these first infant steps of proficiency, when you piece together the incredible machine-like plan that is required in order to be successful at this game. And it actually works out okay. And then you get to the next seasons and you realize that you left the keys to your sled at Grandma Bertha's, and she's a heavy sleeper, and you're like, okay, back to the drawing board, let's try this again. And then you eventually graduate to this functionally tolerable position where you can start to see the whole of it, and where it all kind of shines, and where it all kind of fits together over the long run, where you can finally feel like, I could play this game start to finish and actually make it work out. So over time, I think the million points of fight and brilliance of how all of this meaty gameplay gets packed into the backpack that it is makes you realize that you pretty much invested into flying a 747, clothed as a game, and you can now land it without breaking the landing gear. And once you get to that point, it feels pretty good. It feels like you've just experienced something awesome. So, final thoughts. Nevsky, and I've spent a lot of time talking about this game. This is probably one of the longer reviews I've ever done, but it's also been 4 years since I originally thought I'd review it, so lots happened since then. Opening Nevsky is like opening the box to a veritable toolkit of medieval warfare, sandwiched between the strategic and the eye level of game. It's, a masterfully skilled mind will see in this game's design a reflection of themselves. And they will be able to thoroughly explore and navigate all it has to offer at their high level in its all brilliance. Some of us with a glacially slow, methodical minds like me are still going to find a smorgasbord of opportunity prepared within a medieval set piece, a mental and visceral diorama playing out of medieval warfare as it occurred in history, with all its hiccups, imperfect assertions, and plenty of best-laid plans withering on the awry field. And it reminds me a bit, back when I was a kid, when I was about 10 years old, we went to Victoria, BC. And Victoria, BC is a wonderful little place, very charming, tea with the queen, although it wasn't really the queen, nor was it queen, so I wasn't a champion. But I remember going to this place. My parents would get Bouchard Gardens, tea, all this stuff, vinegar and chips or something. And all I wanted to do is go to this place called Miniature World, because Miniature World had these amazing set pieces. It was this big place, and you'd go in, and they'd have, like dollhouses and crap. But they'd also have these, like, here's Napoleon marching over, and everything richly detailed, the grass. So, like, I spent an entire day there while my parents went off and running. And they eventually started thinking I was kind of weird, the people that run it. Like, most people are just here for like an hour. But I loved that they made these exquisite sets of battles of lands in the medieval era. And I can say that this game, when you're playing it and you're into it, really evokes that same kind of feeling of excitement. And if you're like me, you're going to love this. If you're not like me, I think you're probably going to love it. As long as you're okay with the whole panorama and not just being about battles. Plenty of great games for just the battles. This is a game, like, you will be unraveling this onion for years and you're never going to quite see it all. So it took many years to ruminate and ferment this tiny brain to understand the whole of Nevsky, but it's now, like, after the last 6 months, it's now in my top 10 games of all time without question. It feels like a live-action reenactment of medieval warfare in miniature, and what other game could do that at this point right now? So that's it. That's my review. I do want to say, if you want some source material or some things that get you in the mood, I always like I always like to have books or movies or whatever that kind of get me in the mood and help me understand the context. This game has everything you need to know in the background book about what was trying to be done, about the rule there, every card. It is as detailed as you could ask for. I am privileged and honored to have known this playbook. But at the same time, there's other things. If you kind of want to know kind of the way people like wave off the let's raise the levy, watch The Last Kingdom. I really enjoy it. I don't vouch for the quality. I just love it. I love all the seasons of it. And I just, when you see these, when they're like, we must raise the levy, and stuff, and then you realize that's not just, then a cut scene, and then a few seconds go by, and then, here we are, or they didn't show up. Yes, see? Raise the levy. And so that's the one thing that, think. The other thing is, if you are interested, there is a very campy YouTube video that really is like, it's an hour and a half. It's Nevsky. It will actually play out this sort of thing, and it's really, don't raise your expectations to modern cinema, but it actually does a pretty good job of kind of relaying kind of what's going on and how it actually, how all the pieces, where Alexander fits and Andrew, and like the tension there of Rus and the Teutons and all that stuff. So I would recommend that if you're interested. Anyway, there we go. Nevsky, 10 out of 10. Absolutely love it. Also, if you're interested, I'm going to put links on where you can learn this, because maybe A, you're probably smarter than me, and B, in the last, again, since I started, in the years that have gone by, there are 3 tremendously good learning, I'm going to mangle his name, Jean-Michel Rousseau, let's go with that, who's done an excellent 3-part series on how to learn this game in precise detail. There's a playthrough on Homo Ludens with the designer who has two, who's kind of being the coach for, well, not to the host. He won't give advice to the host, but 2 people playing the game and kind of really explaining it out in ways that I never could. And if you go to a site called Rally-the-Troops, you can even play it online right now with the rules enforced. Which is huge. I have already played several games. I'm in heaven. Not only can I set it up here now, I can actually play it online against other people. No AI, but having the rules enforced is huge. That's probably the fastest way to learn the game right now. Anyway, I've talked too long and I've said too little, and that's the story of my life. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time on Hairbrain Games.